right, folks, welcome in to Pickaxe and Roll, brought to you by our good friends over at number 38 at Bet Online. I'm your host, Ryan Blackburn, at NBA Blackburn on Twitter, part of the Mile High Sports Podcast Network, and I am excited to talk about Game 7. The Nuggets are going to play Game 7 tomorrow. Who'd have thunk it? I thunk it. I predicted Nuggets in 7 at the beginning of the series. And who knows? Maybe that'll come to pass. Maybe it won't. But it will be very interesting to see what happens tomorrow. We got a good picture of what the Nuggets are going to try at practice today. And then I'm going to go over some keys to the game, things about Joker and Ant, also Denver's history in Game 7s. Should be very interesting. Should be a good time. Looking forward to it. Hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, especially if you are new. But first, want to tell you all about Bet Online here real quick. The number one app when it comes to your summer sports this season with MLB, golf, and NBA and NHL playoffs. Get the latest odds and lines, including the latest team matchups, player props, and odds on just about every sport out there. Follow your favorite teams, head to the website today, or use your mobile device and get in on the action. Bet Online, where the game starts. Okay, let's get into this. Let's talk about Game 7. We're going to talk about the keys to victory and things like that in just a little bit, but I wanted to go over what happened at Nuggets practice today first. It was a big deal. Nice to see Denver get a couple days off. They used Friday. Basically, Denver played Thursday, as you all probably know. They used Friday as a recovery day, and they came in today, Saturday, with the intention of improving as many things as possible, setting up a game plan for Game 7, and just getting some good treatment and some good preparation for what's about to happen. It's going to be interesting to see how the Nuggets respond, but the last time they had more than one day off, they played pretty well in Game 3. That was a big deal, and Denver got that. It was at the perfect time. And I think now having an extra day off heading into Game 7 comes at the perfect time as well. And Denver clearly needed it. They absolutely needed it for sure. Especially, it felt like at the end of not at the end of Game 6, at the start of Game 6, Denver was just worn down, having played on again, off again for a few days in a row. And I'm very curious to see whether they will have that level of physicality and energy and athleticism and all the things that, as was talked about today at practice, that the winning team has had. Not just the Nuggets, but it's been the Timberwolves too. The team that has won each of the games has really established the level of physicality and the level of athleticism needed for that matchup. It hasn't been as much about shooting. It hasn't been as much about anything else. It's mostly been about which team has played harder and which team has played within the realm of what they're supposed to do with the physicality perspective. I'm going to drop a link in the chat to milehighsports.com. I don't know whether that link is even going to work, but actually it looks pretty ugly. Can you see the SEO that I put in there? Game 7, Michael Malone, Michael Porter, Christian Brown, Jamal Murray. Very funny. That is to my story from earlier today on practice, on how the Nuggets are preparing. I'm going to read off some of the quotes and some of the takes that I had in there. But if you want a visual medium for what I'm about to share and talk about, go check out that story. Denver wrapped up their practice earlier today. I thought that they would go a bit long in this situation, but they didn't. Usually they go about 20 to 30 minutes over the specific time when media is supposed to be there. This time they went less than 10 minutes over. And it was interesting to see. There was a lot of clapping, a lot of cheering towards the end of it. And then we were in the gym. And it's a packed little one-court gym, of course. It's got the 6 hoops, the 4 that get lowered down once practice is over. But in that confined space, it was really interesting to see how people reacted. Often it's very normal for players, hey, you're going to get some shots in. You're going to get some free throws in. Maybe get a little bit of final work in. You're talking to a coach, talking to a player personnel guy. But there were a lot of guys, there were a lot of players, a lot of coaches that just hung out for a long time. And I took note of that as it's just a very serious atmosphere. And you notice those things sort of because of how small the gym is. Like there's a lot of people in there. And there were a lot of people in there while the interviews were going on. And it was loud. It was a loud environment where people are chatting, people are talking, whether they're joking around or, like I said, they're talking about some sort of game plan or how they're going to approach a situation tomorrow. There was a lot of interesting stuff that was going on. And then the interviews were going on, and I could barely hear anything. Like you've got a bunch of folks that are trying to get content. And so in that particular venue, it's not easy to hear. But some of the interesting things that were said, Michael Malone talking about his message for game 7 and whether it differed from game 3, quote, "It's a little different. After being down 0-2, everybody thinks the series is over, and they had won 2 in a row in our building, and then we win 3 in a row before obviously losing that last game. We know that in game 7, quote, every possession matters. There could be no my bads tomorrow. Our discipline, our urgency, our aggression, our physicality all have to be there for 48 minutes." And that's not surprising. That's a good message from a coach. It's an understandable one where he's right that every single game in this series has been defined, in my opinion, by physicality, whether it's the correct use of physicality by a team or if it's I think Minnesota kind of pushing the envelope in game 2. They really pushed it in that particular game. And I think we saw an overcorrection in how the league was calling it, how the refs were calling it in games 3 and 4 and 5. And I thought the Nuggets really approached it in a better way in those games than the Timberwolves did. The Timberwolves needed some time to adjust. They finally adjusted in game 6, and they did a really good job, I think, of backing off of the pressure full court and instead focusing on cutting off the driving lanes for Jamal Murray, forcing him into kickout situations to KCP, Aaron Gordon, Christian Brown, players of that nature and even Justin Holiday, like they're going to live with that. And then Nikola Jokic, Michael Porter Jr., Jamal Murray, those are the guys that obviously Minnesota doesn't want to leave. But even on those possessions, those 3 guys did not deliver on their threes. And so the Nuggets got very 3-point happy, obviously, in game 6. They did not play with the level of physicality needed. They did not go downhill. And it's not a surprise that they lost the game. What was obviously a surprise was that they lost the way that they did. And so I think everybody understands how it happened. Obviously, it wasn't great, but I shared this stat yesterday. I want to say, was it yesterday or last? I think it was yesterday, from Youngmisuk, who did a good job of compiling a list from ESPN Stats and Info that basically said that of the 4 previous times that a team in a closeout opportunity had lost by 30 plus points in the game before, they bounced back and won in the following game. I think it was in a closeout game 6, but it might be a closeout game at all. 3 of the 4 times that team, the Nuggets in this case, won. And so it's not a death sentence. It's not the fact that Denver lost in that way was never going to be a thing. Like it's not going to be defining of what game 7 is going to be, I think. I think the Nuggets, they were woken up. Michael Porter Jr., he said, quote, "I feel like the team in this series that has hit first has had success for the rest of the game." He was talking about that in relation to the first quarter and just how extremely important it was and how it's hard to fight back in those situations when one of the teams establishes a lead. I mean, think about how many times the lead has actually changed in the second half. It hasn't been a lot. Most of the time, the team that is leading, especially if there's a margin, has been really, really good. And so I'm not surprised that this has happened and that there are going to be some opportunities here for the Nuggets to really wake up. But a couple other things. Christian Brown noted the physicality. He noted that both teams have done a good job of making adjustments. There's just been a lot of difference in the physicality allowed in each game. He wasn't really blaming the refs, but it's just like, that's basketball. You can't really control that. Michael Porter was very much of the mind, quote, I got to find a way to integrate myself into the game and really try to ... There's more ways to get yourself going than just open threes. So I've got to look for my shot, look to be aggressive, and look to find the ball on Sunday. Michael Porter, and I guess I could share this in segment 2 for keys, but I'll share it now. I'm just going to read off this paragraph that I wrote in the story. Porter was dynamic against the Los Angeles Lakers in Denver's 5-game first-round series, producing 22.8 points per game on 55% from the field and 48% from three. Against the Timberwolves, that production has dropped precipitously to 11.3 points per game on 39% from the field and 35% from three. The Timberwolves have placed Jaden McDaniels, their best matchup for Porter, on him with more frequency. That has been a challenge for Porter to navigate. He's had 2 20-point performances in this series. He had one in game 1, and he had one in game 3, I believe. And then outside of that, he's been in the single digits in all 4 of the other games. So can he get a 20-point performance? Can he free himself up? He was talking about that in practice today. I think he feels like he's been bottled up. We'll talk about why that's happening and why he's seeing Jaden McDaniels on him more than maybe Jamal Murray is. But we'll talk about that in the second segment. Finally, from practice, the last to leave the gym was Jamal Murray. He spent a ton of time after practice. And sometimes this is for show. Sometimes, it's not, I don't think this is what he was doing. Sometimes guys will stick around when the cameras are on and they'll make sure to show that they're getting in the work, things like that. I don't think that that's how Murray really rolls. He's very obstinate when it comes to the media anyway. So it's not like he's trying to curry favor or anything like that. But he stayed after practice. He got up a bunch of work navigating pick and rolls, trying to go to the floater, trying to figure out when to go to the fall away mid-range jumper. And then he took a bunch of threes, took some pull-ups, did a bunch of things. And the last time we saw him do that in a practice situation was before game 3. And I thought he had the best game of his series in that game 3 when given the most amount of rest. So, look, I don't know if that's going to happen again. I don't know if Murray's going to bounce back. I don't know if he's going to be better. I think he's going to have to be if the Nuggets have a chance of winning. And I think that he's going to have to find a way to dig deep. But that's one where I think about. I think about what Murray can give and what he's able to provide in Game 7, even when he's clearly not at his physical peak right now. Because the calf injury it's clearly affected him. But I know that he's not going to use that. He's not going to use that as an excuse, nor should Nuggets fans. You either get it done or you don't. Malone said on Murray, quote, he looked very hungry today. He looked like he hadn't eaten in 2 days, so hopefully that carries over into tomorrow. I hope he doesn't eat until 6 o'clock p.m. Obviously, that's the start time. And then on Game 7 from Malone, the message is simple, man. Game 7s are great. Enjoy it. Me, Jamal, and Nikola have been a part of 4 of those games in our 6 years in the playoffs. That's why you work so hard to get home court advantage for some of the best fans in the NBA. Denver knows how important this is to fans. They know how important this is to them. And I'm very curious to see who steps up in that moment, because there's not a lot of Nuggets that have been in a Game 7 before. The Nuggets were never in a Game 7 last year. Obviously, the first round series this year was in 5 games. This is the first Game 7 the Nuggets have played in 4 years. And we'll talk about that on the other side. We'll be right back. But first, I want to tell you about number 38, where I was at on Thursday. They're going to host another watch party on Sunday. Going to be very fun. Obviously, number 38 is a tremendous place. We wouldn't be allied with them If they weren't, they've got a great outdoor patio area where you could watch the game under the sun. They've got a big old projection screen that's very, very good. And they've got a bunch of different food options, bunch of different drink options. You name it, they probably have it. Lots of good food. I always love their chicken sandwich when I go there. It's spicy, but it's crispy and it's delicious. So make sure to go check it out. Number 38. They do $15 pitchers. And when Mile High Sports and Denver Stiffs are there, you get a giveaways and you get merchandise. And scan the QR code. You could be down for a jersey drawing and tickets and things like that. They do lots of great stuff. Make sure to check it out over at number 38. We'll be right back on Pickaxe and Roll. All right, we're back. Pickaxe and Roll, Ryan Blackburn here. Thank you so much for tuning into the show. Leave a like, subscribe to the video. If you're listening on the audio side, make sure to rate, review, and subscribe. That would help out tremendously. Let's go through some comments here. We've got a Wolves fan in the chat. He says, Wolves fan here. Good luck tomorrow, guys. Should be a great game. Thank you, B. Dunny. Really appreciate it. This will be a very interesting thing. Raj asks, Ryan, do you have any idea if there's a contingency plan for Jamal if he comes out pressing/missing shots? Will Malone go to CB early or just pull the ball or put the ball in Jokic/AG's hands more often? This is a good question, and I think the answer is no. I honestly don't think that the answer is anything other than Jamal. And here's why. If you remember, the Nuggets back in 2019, this is a good segue into Game 7 history. The Nuggets back in 2019, they were in their first ever playoff environment. And everybody was young. They're trying to figure it out. But Michael Malone quickly determined that the future of the team was going to be based around Nikola Jokic and Jamal Murray. And so even when those guys, and it wasn't really Jokic, let's be honest, it was Murray. Even when Murray was struggling initially, he was a big piece of what the Nuggets were doing. And despite the fact that he struggled in Game 2, Michael Malone left him in. He struggled in Game 3. Michael Malone left him in. They even changed the starting lineup in Game 4 of that first Spurs series so that, like, it wasn't just because Will Barton wasn't that great. They did it so that they could get Jamal Murray off of Derek White, who was killing him in that game. And Murray paid it off. Murray had, I think, back-to-back 30 spots in games 4 and 5 in that series. They won on the road against the Spurs for the first time in like a decade. And they ultimately won Game 7 on what was a very, very important Jamal Murray floater. He wasn't perfect throughout that game, but he was mostly good. And then the Nuggets put the ball in his hands, and he shot that floater, if you remember, sky high, all the way up to the rafters. And that was just a fun team. That was a young team. It was very, very fun. And then Denver plays another Game 7 against the Blazers, and Denver ultimately lost that one. And Murray played horribly in that game. Horribly. Jokic was very good, but he was the only guy. And I actually have the stats here from some of the Game 7 games. In that particular one, Denver scored 96 points. They shot 2 of 19 from 3. They shot 28 of 39 from the free throw range. They shot 39 free throws and scored 96 points. That is hard to do. That's a nice little trip down memory lane. That is very difficult to do. But missing 11 free throws in a game that comes down to the wire, it's gonna cost you sometimes. Then 2020 happens, and Denver plays another 2 Game 7s. They come back from 3-1 twice, and ultimately in that Game 7, actually before that, so Games 4, 5, and 6, Murray had 50, 42, and 50 points to kind of give Denver the boost and the energy that they needed in order to get back into that series, get themselves mentally back into that. And then he hurt himself in that game against Utah. I think Joe Ingles rolled his ankle. And Jokic has to take over. And Denver scores 80 total points in that game. And the great thing is Utah scored 78. They struggled. They really, really struggled in that one. Denver did a great job of making it work. Even though Mike Conley, right at the end of the game, had a chance to win it, had a chance to send Denver home. And had they sent Denver home, gonna be very, very interesting to see what Denver would have done in that moment had they lost a first round series against the Utah Jazz. That would have been crazy. But that didn't happen. And Denver ultimately moves on. And they go down 3-1 again to the Clippers. They're down 17 in game 5. Ultimately work it back. And then game 7 happens. And Jamal scores 40 points. Nikola is just in his bag. I think he had 13 points, 22 rebounds, and actually it was 15, 22, and 13 or something disgusting like that. Just some disgusting line. And Denver found a way to win. They found a way to perform. And looking back through the history, that game that the Nuggets played against the Clippers was the only time in franchise history that the Nuggets have shot above 30% from three-point range. They shot 13 of 37. They shot 35% in that game. It wasn't like they were tremendous, but they did well enough in that moment, found a way to win, and it was just a tremendous, tremendous performance from Denver and from Jamal specifically, who really rose to the occasion in that game. So Denver's 3-1 in game 7s with this current core of Malone, Jokic, and Murray. Michael Porter played in the last couple of those. Nobody else has, but it was interesting. Vlatko Čančar was around for that moment. He was around for this moment. Unfortunately, he's not going to be in the rotation for either of them, which is too bad. But Denver is a team. They're 4-3 in game 7s. They are solid. Denver, obviously, they're a different team than they were 4 years ago when they were in the bubble. Jokic is a much better player. Murray was at a different level in the bubble. There were some amazing performances that he's had. He's not bubble Murray. That's not a thing. But he was in a zone in that moment. And it's going to be hard for him to recreate that. But it's in there. He's capable of it. And Michael Porter is he's obviously a better player, more well-rounded player. And Denver's just got a better team around them with Aaron Gordon, KCP. Even their bench it's not better, but it's solid enough. Reggie Jackson is equivalent to Monte Morris in some ways. Justin Holiday is equivalent to Torrey Craig, and Christian Brown is equivalent to Mason Plumlee. For not the reasons that you think. They're just big hustlers. I think that it's going to be fascinating to see what Denver does in this game 7. Going to be very interesting. I'm looking forward to it. And now we should talk about keys to victory. We'll do a couple of them now, a couple of them after the next break. The first key I have, Nikola Jokic has to be the best player on the floor. That's the most important thing that can happen in this particular game. I broke it down. I don't remember if I broke it down on podcast or was just thinking about it offline. Joker was the best player on the floor in game 3, in game 5, and then half of game, he was I'm having it split between him and Ant in game 4. He had 35, 7, and 7. Ant had 44, 5, and 5. They were basically equivalent. A little bit more pressure on Ant in that moment because nobody else could shoot for that team at that moment. But I think that Ant has been the best player on the floor. for 2.5 games, and Joker's been the best player on the floor for 2.5 games. Now, game 2 was the other one. Game 2, it didn't matter. Like, it might have been Karl Anthony Towns, if I'm being honest. Cat might have been the best player on the floor in that particular game. Maybe it was Naz Reid. Who knows? But that was more of a team win for Minnesota. If Denver's going to win in this particular game, Nikola Jokic has to be the best player on the floor. I find it difficult to believe that anybody else on Denver would be. Maybe Jamal has it in him, but with the current circumstances, with the injuries that he's dealing with, and with the personnel that he's having to battle against, I just don't see it. So it's probably got to be Joker. And what he's going to see on film, what he's already seen, obviously, what he knows he's going to have to do, is he's just going to have to go through Karl Anthony Towns. So much of the battle that he's had against Cat has been about not necessarily attacking that matchup head on. It's been about trying to get Gobert on him instead. They're trying to navigate it. They're trying to do everything that they can to make it an easier matchup. And oftentimes that doesn't happen. And then Joker has to take a pretty bad shot against Cat. And sometimes those are fallaways. Sometimes those are just contested jumpers. Sometimes they're floaters in traffic. Most important, though, I think Joker's got to do a better job of going one-on-one against Cat. Because he's going to play a lot. They're going to play him. They're probably not going to play Gobert on Jokic that much. Jokic has already torched that matchup. And I think the best case scenario for the T-Wolves is that Cat can limit Joker to below his normal threshold with Gobert lurking. That can't happen. Joker's got to rise above it. He's got to be the best guy. It can't be Ant. If Ant has put up 35 points and 7 assists, Joker's got to put up 30, 20, 10. He's got to find a way to either involve his teammates in a healthy way or to put the team on his back as a scorer. I'm not sure which one he's going to do. The game will play out the way it does, but I have to imagine it's going to start with him going at Cat pretty consistently. Because if you can get Karl Anthony Towns in foul trouble, that changes the rotation for Minnesota in a big way. Next, Jamal Murray's just got to accept the challenge. He's got to find a way to rise above the problems that he's currently dealing with physically, and he's got to be better than where he has been. In this current matchup, Jamal has had the following point totals in each of the games. He has scored, as I pull up the totals here, 17 points, 8 points, 24, 19, 16, and 10. He has been above 45% from the field in games 3, 4, and 5. He was pretty solid. In game 1, 2, and 6, he was at 42%, 16%, and 22%. Just not good enough. And sometimes it's even decision-making. He's got to try to limit the turnovers as best as he can. I know that that's a hard prospect because of who the Timberwolves are, but he's got to find a way to rise above the problems. There's been a lot of noise. There's been a lot of criticism of Jamal Murray. I rightly was critical of him after game 6. Like, he just was not bringing the right energy. He was not good enough. If you're Denver, you need Jamal to be good. You don't need him to be great. You need him to be good. You need the Timberwolves to put Jaden McDaniels on him, not feel like they can have Anthony Edwards on him the entire time. But what the Timberwolves are going to try to do is they're going to try to get away with Anthony Edwards on him so that they can keep Jaden McDaniels on Michael Porter Jr. If they can do that, then the Timberwolves will try to cut off 2 heads of the snake at the same time. Jaden McDaniels is a dynamic defender. He is their best defender. He's lanky. He's athletic. He is smart. He's physical. He pushes the boundaries. And he does a great job of making life difficult for both guys. But he's only one player. And so you need him on one of those guys. And then the other one is getting Ant in the starting lineup, especially if Mike Conley's out there, if Karl-Anthony Towns and Rudy Gobert are out there. Cat's going to be on Joker. AG is going to get Rudy. KCP is going to get Mike Conley. And then Jamal's going to get Ant. So what can Denver do in that situation? Well, Jamal Murray has to make Anthony Edwards work. He's got to tire him out on the offensive end so that when the Nuggets are on defense, Anthony Edwards can't carry the entire burden by himself, because he's only one player too, and he's probably going to play at least 42 minutes a game, if not closer to 45, maybe even 48. So if I'm Denver, you got to try to get Jamal going, because what the Timberwolves are going to do is they're going to try to have Anthony Edwards defend him so that they can keep Jaden McDaniels on Michael Porter Jr. If they're allowed to do that without any consequences, Denver will lose. Denver's got to find a way to tire out Edwards. He's got the weight of the world on his shoulders, man. He's got a ton of burden. He is their best player. He's one of their best defenders. He's going to be a guy that needs to, he's going to need to find a way. This guy says, Jamal plays zero defense. They'll go at him. He has easy money. I actually thought Jamal's defense was way better than his offense in Game 6. I thought he made some decent plays. I thought the breakdowns were more about Michael Porter and were more about KCP, if I'm being honest. Jamal isn't a great defender. One of the things that he has struggled with, and we'll talk about that in the next segment, is when he's switching onto Cat or onto Naz Reid. And if those guys play with size and they play with physicality and Jamal doesn't provide enough resistance, then that is a problem. The other factor is that Jamal's just a point guard. So, if the Nuggets were doing the same thing to Mike Conley a little bit more, there would be problems, obviously. So, look, we will see what happens. I'm very curious to see how this goes. When we come back, we're going to do more keys, and then I'm going to talk about Joker and Ant, because I think there's a dynamic there that is pretty important. We'll be right back. But first, let's get into Scott DeHuff.
Hey, what's up? It's DeHuff. I love to have fun. So tune into my podcast, DeHuff Uncensored. I give unfiltered takes on Denver sports, crazy news from around the world. Plus, you never know which one of my characters is going to swing by. Well, I hope one of them's your mother. Oh, Connery, Mama is always here for you. What in the blue heck is going on here? So subscribe and get ready to laugh to DeHuff Uncensored anywhere you find podcasts. Follow me on social media at DeHuff Podcast.
We're back. Final segment, Pickaxe and Roll. Thank you so much for tuning into the show. Let's wrap it up with a couple more keys and then Joker versus Ant. Third key, I've got 6 total. I'll go through them pretty quickly here. Michael Porter Jr. must be clutch. He's got to find a way. He has not played well on the offensive end in the last few games. As I mentioned in the second segment, or maybe it was the first, I don't remember. He just hasn't been good enough. And the Nuggets have needed him to convert on some of the threes, some of the open shots that he gets. Wasn't able to do that in Game 6. Didn't get a lot of opportunities in Game 5. And then in Game 4, he wasn't great. So I think the most important thing that Denver can do is try to create some open opportunities for him at the rim or open mid-range jumpers early on in the game and try to get him into a little bit of a rhythm. Get him seeing the floor, maybe get him some transition threes, because if he gets rolling, it bends the Minnesota defense to the point where they have to correct on him so often, where they have to over tilt the floor towards him. And when you have the Joker Jamal pick and roll, I trust those guys to figure it out in a normal circumstance. What the Wolves were able to do in Game 6 was unbalance the floor, shrink it a ton, and make sure that neither of those guys got good looks in the middle. It's harder to do that when you have one guy having to account for Michael Porter Jr. for the entire time. So we're going to see what happens, but if Michael Porter Jr. could get going, that'd be great. As I mentioned in the history of Game 7s, it's very rare for guys to get hot in those moments, for guys to be like, especially on the Nuggets side of things, you just don't get a lot of great shooting often. So if Denver got that, that'd be great. I'm not expecting it, but if they could get it from Mike, yeah, that would be a big deal. Number 4, Denver's got to match and exceed the Minnesota physicality. Like I talked about in the beginning of the show, the series has been defined by which team has set the bar for the physical play. Games 1 and 2, it was clearly the Wolves. They took it to Denver. They were very physical. They did a great job of getting the Nuggets uncomfortable, and they got them to self-combust. Games 3, 4, and 5, the Nuggets recovered. The officials, I think, called it a little bit tighter. That really helped Denver, of course. But part of that was because the Nuggets were executing within that. It was not just because of the refs. Denver was executing, and then when they weren't executing, they were able to point to specific moments where the Wolves fouled them. And I think the refs listened in that moment. This wasn't a rigged thing or anything like that. I think the NBA is going to be happy if Anthony Edwards gets more screen time in the Western Conference Finals, believe me. But I do think it'll be interesting to see how the game is called. Will there be a bunch of free throws? Will Denver be able to get to the free throw line? Can they get into the middle of the floor? I'm very curious to see what happens. The other thing is battling against bigger players on defense. I mentioned this with Jamal, but it's not just Jamal. It's Justin Holiday, it's Reggie Jackson, it's Christian Brown, it's KCP. Rudy Gobert did a great job in Game 6 of settling under the rim, sealing players under the rim, and finishing over the top in the middle of the paint, or getting fouled. And it wasn't just him. It was the other two bigs as well, as Karl Anthony Towns and Naz Reid. Those guys took advantage of the size mismatch. Denver's going to play small. That's just how they're going to do it. If I were them, I would try to avoid conceding a bunch of switches, but they're just going to get cross-matched. That's going to happen. They've got to be strong. They've got to defend without fouling. It's going to be hard, but they got to find a way to do it. Number 5, will the bench play better or not? In games 3 through 5, the bench was a big story for Denver. For the most part, they were great. Christian Brown was closing games over Michael Porter. Justin Holiday hit some clutch threes. Reggie Jackson was hitting the pick and roll. He was doing a great job. Game 6, that went away. Game 6, the first bench points that the Nuggets scored were at the beginning of the fourth quarter on a Christian Brown dunk. So it took over 3 quarters for the bench to get involved. That can't happen, whether it's Justin Holiday or Reggie Jackson or Christian Brown, or maybe it's a mystery player. Those guys have got to get more involved. If they don't, the Nuggets will be out. And then finally, the Nuggets have to have Anthony Edwards see bodies and arms and hands and feet and defense and players and trees and a forest. He's got to see a bunch of people in his way. The worst thing that can happen for Denver on the defensive end is if Anthony Edwards starts getting rolling. If he starts getting downhill, if he starts doing his thing, playing a very physical game, but also an athletic game, and also pulling up from 3. He's playing with such confidence right now. He's been so good. And it has been really, really interesting watching him because he's grown in front of our eyes, right? He has grown so much, not just in this series, but in the previous series. And then just in the regular season, he found steps. Everybody was comparing him to Michael Jordan. And you can understand why, man. Could absolutely understand why. So I'm looking forward to seeing how Denver does that, how they can find a way, if they can find a way, to slow him just a touch. Because if he can be disrupted, if he is shooting a lower percentage from 3, if he's not getting all the way to the rim, Denver can find a way to slow him down just a bit. The margins become so tight in a game 7 that if this is like a 90 to 85 kind of game, which most game 7s seemingly are, then you don't want them to be in any rhythm by the end of it. Now, he'll find a way. He'll do what he can. But I do think that there is a reason to believe that Anthony Edwards will get going, which I think makes it very scary for Nuggets fans. They're going to have to guard against it as much as they possibly can. Final thoughts. Nikola Jokic versus Anthony Edwards is such an interesting battle between superstars, right? Like, they're so different, but in a way, they're very similar. In a way, both of these teams are led by players that have ultimate belief in their team, that have ultimate competitive nature, that don't take no for an answer when it comes to the basketball floor. And they do a great job of lifting people up in such vastly different ways. Anthony Edwards is the prototypical NBA superstar. He is the guy that, like, he's one of the faces of the NBA in a lot of ways. First overall pick, 22 years old, already showcasing just how good he can be on the national stage and doing it at an early level. With Joker, it took him longer. Like, his first foray into the playoffs was 2015-16, 16-17, 17-18. 18-19 was his first year. And I think that year he averaged like 25, 13, and 8. And this is his second, or actually it's his third time in the playoffs, I want to say. Yeah, third time, because he had a first-round series against the Memphis Grizzlies in his second season. His third season, he had a first-round series against the Nuggets. And then fourth year, he's just getting better and better and better. Just they are preparing him to really take over. And I just want to kind of give him some credit for how he has handled this moment, for how he continues to lead his team and play with the utmost level of competitiveness and fire and positive energy that he can possibly bring. And the way that he is doing it is different from Joker. They're completely different in how they lead. And Joker, for all the positive things that he has done, he has been, and people have been slower to understand what his leadership is, because he's so private. He's not out there all the time. He's not loud and boisterous. Ant is loud and boisterous. That's just who he is. But the way that they lead is so different, despite the fact that they have very similar traits in how they lift up their teams. And this is one of the battles, I think, for the face of the NBA. Ant is part of the new crowd. Joker was drafted in 2014. Anthony Edwards was drafted in 2020. There's a little bit of not a generational gap there, but Ant is just a younger player. He's going to have the next 5 years, maybe more, of just like killing people. And then by the end of that, that will be where Joker is at now, where Joker has killed people over the course of these last few years. He's been dominant. He's had ups and downs for sure. But these two guys are so good. And NBA fans should be really pleased with the show that they've been given, because it has been tough. It's been physical. The games haven't exactly been close, but they've been calculating. Both of these teams have gone back and forth. And I just can't help but feel like this is going to come down to Ant versus Joker in Game 7. Who's going to be the best? Who's going to be the guy? Who's going to make the clutch shots down the stretch? Who's going to make the clutch defensive plays down the stretch? Which player is going to cause the defense to tilt more because the Nuggets have had to overreact to Anthony Edwards being amazing, and the Timberwolves have had to do the same. So I'm so curious. This is going to be a lot of fun. I hope that everybody's excited for the moment. I know everybody's nervous. Here's the thing. If it's meant to be, it will be. If the Nuggets are meant to move on, they'll find a way. Because they've got the best player in the world. Because they've got Jamal Murray, who has struggled this entire time. And yet, Game 7 lives on. Game 7, anything can happen. The T-Wolves could win. They absolutely could. And if they do, they deserve it. They've put on a battle against the Nuggets, the defending champs. And the Nuggets have defended their title pretty well up until this point. They've been pushed to the brink. How will they respond in this moment? How will they handle the pressure? They've handled it well in the past. Can they deliver now in front of the home crowd and keep the season alive? We will see. Folks, that is going to do it for this episode of Pickaxe and Roll, brought to you by our good friends over at Superbook Sport. Oh gosh, I did it again. Number 38 and Bet Online. Thank you so much for tuning into the show. Really appreciate all the love and support on the podcast. Please hit the like button, hit the subscribe button. Looking forward to seeing what comes next. We're going to find out together. Everybody, thank you so much for tuning in. Leave a like on the way out. We'll talk to you guys very soon.